Adoption is inspired by many things: infertility, age, the desire to give someone a better life, social and financial situations. Questions that arise when you bring someone new into the family. The doctors are on call tonight.
All you need is love.
Funding for On Call is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Larson Manufacturing is proud to support On Call, starting its 11th year of opening doors for important medical information. And by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, Regional Health, the Brookings Health System, Dr. Mark Bubach with Dakota Allergy and Asthma, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.
Hello and welcome to a special Valentine's edition of On Call Television. My wife suggested that for this special day of love, we should explore the medical social topic of adoption. About 16 and a half years ago, our family of 3 children, all boys, grew with the addition of a girl adopted from China. Now, almost 20, our daughter Julia has enhanced our family in immeasurable ways and has piqued our interest in the topic. There are many questions that could be asked about adoption. What is the difference between open and closed adoption? How can someone with an unwanted pregnancy provide an opportunity for a family wanting to adopt? Where should one go to explore opportunities for adoption? What rules are out there to protect the child, the biologic mother, the adoptive parents? Who can adopt? What are the costs of such a process? Is international adoption still possible? Something like 3 out of every 100 live births are adopted in this country, while the next most adopting country is Sweden with 1 out of 100. Why would that be? Please call in your questions on adoption. Call us at 1-888-376-6225. That is 1-888-376-6225. Or you can email us at questions@oncalltelevision.com. What makes this show tick are the questions that come from you, our audience. And here to help us with our discussion on adoption are Dr. Debra Johnston, a family practice physician at the Avera Medical Group Brookings and a cherished partner of mine. After an undergraduate degree in engineering, Deb went to the University of Iowa College of Medicine. She did her residency through the USD School of Medicine Rural Residency Program here in Brookings. She's been practicing in Brookings for 15 years. Deb and her husband are the adoptive parents of 2 children. Kristin Asche graduated from SDSU before completing law school. She and both of her brothers were adopted, and she and her husband are adoptive parents as well. Welcome to you both. And Kristin, let's talk about your path to adoption. Of course, you're the adopted kid and you're adoptive parent. So I love this story. That's why you're picked, you know. And we also heard you wear red today.
Yes.
Yes. So tell us about your story.
I was adopted myself, and when I was a kid, I thought that's how families were made. I thought you just adopted kids, and then you grew up, and everything was wonderful. And so that's when I met my husband. I always talked about adoption, and we tried to have a family the old-fashioned way, and it turns out we were meant to adopt. And so we started the process, and now we have a fantastic girl who's almost 3.
Great. And Deb, let's hear your story.
I don't know if I've ever told you this before, Rick, but you actually started my story.
How was that?
I have this very vivid memory. I think I was a resident at the time, following you, and we were walking from the clinic across the parking lot, climbing those steps to the hospital, and you were talking about Julia and how much she had brought to your life and how much you loved her and how there was just no difference between the way you felt about her and the way you felt about your boys. And I remember you saying to me, it doesn't matter. The genes don't matter. There's no difference. And I remember thinking, I want to do that someday. And when the time came and we started talking about children of our own, and it wasn't happening the old-fashioned way, it was such an easy plan because it was always part of our plan to have children both biologically and through adoption. When the bio part just didn't happen, we just moved right to the adoption. It was very easy.
Well, it's Julia's fault.
It's Julia's fault.
Unfortunately, the road to adoption is not always smooth. International adoption faces a special roadblocks created by the politics of countries involved. Millions of orphans face a crushing weight while a broken system keeps them from the one thing they need, a family. Stuck is a new documentary narrated by Mariska Hargitay that exposes how the current system is damaging children and discouraging adoptions and how we need to fight for the rights of children to grow up in a family, not an orphanage. International adoption to the United States has dropped 60% since 2004, going from 22,991 to only 9,000 in 2011. Let's watch the trailer of the film.
The current international adoption process takes nearly 3 years and costs around $28,000.
And the most frustrating part is that all of these kids have families. All of these kids have homes in the U.S., and they have for years.
I've applied like 3 different times for the same adoption.
It's been 3.5 years. No one has come for him. We are his only hope.
In the past 5 years, the number of children adopted into the U.S. has plummeted by 50%.
Millions of children are denied the opportunity to thrive.
My son has virtually no teeth on the top. They've all decayed because they're not getting proper nutrition.
The first time we entered an institution, we were speechless. Raising children almost the way you'd raise cattle.
The world has stopped paying attention, and it's failing.
We thought we were going to be one of those families stuck forever. And then in 2 or 3 days, our situation changed completely.
We made the request to the State Department to get those 3,000 children out of Haiti.
All the children in the middle of an adoption process were able to come home.
We saw Erickson being carried out, and we just ran.
We don't need earthquakes or tsunamis. There are millions of children in need, thousands dying every day. Why don't we do something about it?
We want each of these senators to know if we shut down international adoptions, what we are saying to the children is that they don't matter.
The right to a family is a basic human right, and our policies have to start recognizing that.
I love you, Mom.
I love you too.
We were toasting, and he said, to family. I was like, okay, I have to go somewhere and cry right now. It was too much.
Minneapolis on April 23rd at the Southdale 16 theaters. So there's 2 sides to this whole discussion, right? I mean, of course, everybody wants to sell their movie. What controversy do you think circles around this particular topic?
I think one of the things that often gets overlooked. This is so heart-wrenching. You see these children and these parents that want to bring these children into their homes and love them. But what often gets overlooked is a lot of these children that we call orphans actually have a living parent, possibly 2 living parents, living extended families. In many cases, that would love to take care of these children. Sometimes they don't know that these children are in these orphanages. I was actually reading just this afternoon a blog about a family in Uganda who are working on reuniting children with their families, children from the orphanages with their families. And one of the stories that really struck me, a single dad who'd been injured in an accident and taken to the hospital, and his child had been taken to the orphanage and he couldn't find the child. There's lots and lots of orphanages, and he didn't know which one his son was in. And international adoption actually puts a lot of pressure on this system, because there's a lot of money that we adopting Western parents bring into these systems, and it's very ripe for corruption. So when this family, when these people who were working with this organization started looking into this, they were able to actually find this dad. This child's information was in the paperwork, but the overworked orphanage staff hadn't taken the time to try to find this man. And that's just one of the stories. A lot of these children are there because of poverty, because of illness, and with a little bit of support and a little bit of help, these families can actually parent these children, which is the best solution for any child, is to still be with their birth parent family. It doesn't make nearly as good a movie, and it doesn't satisfy people like us who want to parent a child, want to have a family of our own, and we need to figure out how can we do what's right for the child and what's best for the child. And I really think we need to figure out a way to move adoption from being so much about the adults and focus it back on the children, and figure out how to really make it about the children.
Right. Kristin, any comment about that?
I don't have any comment about that, but I will tell you the concerns about corruption, that was one thing that drove us to domestic adoption. When you're going into another country, you don't know how their laws work, and you don't know how they treat their children, and you don't know how they treat the parents. That concerned me a little bit, and that's why we turned to domestic adoption ourselves.
Right.
So.
And part of the reason that we went international was because I was kind of old at the time. You know, I'm an older parent to start with, you know, and I was at the age where the people in the U.S., I was kind of past that stage. But in China, they venerate the old.
Yes, they do.
So
you were wise.
I was, and what's more, I remember my dear buddy Lyle Bose said, "Now don't you go adopting some little kid that could go to a family when you've got 3 already and they don't have any."
Interesting.
You wouldn't want to take that child from somebody who could use that baby as a child. You know, you're just being generous, but you're not doing. You know, it isn't a necessary thing for you. Which made me feel guilty about it, and I went to China adoption agency, Holt, and they said, "Oh, don't feel guilty. You're needed. We need you, and that child needs you."
And that was part of the reason we went international, was because we didn't feel the need to adopt an infant. We were very open to adopting a child who was older. We had some concerns about special needs in the first place, but it was something we thought, hey, we'll do that the next time. We ended up doing special needs adoptions both times with both of our children, so we were open to that. And at the time, China had a reputation as being a very robust system, a very corruption-free system, which I think as time has gone by,
it's changed.
There's some things have come out that are more concerning. Yeah. Not that it's not always been problematic, but.
And you mentioned Holt, and I think regardless of what agency you use, if it's a reputable agency, all you can hope for is that they know what they're doing, and I think Holt is one of those agencies.
One real quality international adoption agency.
Right.
I would ask you to please call your questions in about our topic. Any question, any thought, any comment, 1-888-376-6225. That's 3 8s, 1-888-376-6225, or email it on oncalltelevision.com. Go to the questions button. Well, we already have some questions from Sioux Falls. Talk about a single parent adoption. Is it difficult? What are your feelings on it? Kristin.
You know, I think there are kids that need parents, and I think kids that need loving parents, and regardless of what shape that comes in, as long as somebody is going to care for somebody who wouldn't otherwise have a parent. I think there are challenges. Adoption isn't easy, and it's nice to have a support system. But the single parents I know have support systems. It just doesn't look like my support system, but it's still a support system. So, and there are definitely agencies that help create that support system if you don't already have it. Right. So it's not a deal breaker, I don't think at all.
My sister is actually a single adoptive parent. So it happens. She has a fantastic support system. It's not family. She lives states away from her family, from me and my parents and my brother. But she has a wonderful support system with friends. It is challenging. Parenting is hard. My husband and I look at each other on a regular basis and say, I don't know how single parents do this. And there are some special challenges with adoptive parenting that regular parenting doesn't involve. But I think you can do it as a single parent. You just have to really be thinking carefully about it and in it for the right reasons, which is why all of us should become parents for the right reasons.
Yep. I have a dear friend who's adopted 3 international boys, and she's all alone, quote, well, she's surrounded by friends and family, and what a great mom and a great parent, and these kids are great. Yeah. So, you know, how lucky could you be? Yeah. Here's from Aberdeen. 14-year-old adoptive child is angry about his or her birth mother giving her up. How can she deal with it?
Of course she's angry.
But they're 14. They're always angry. It doesn't matter. They're angry.
You know, I think there's so much truth to that. 14-year-olds are angry, period. But the 14-year-old adoptive child has so much more to be angry about. I wish I had a nice, easy, pat answer for this situation, but there's so many variables in that situation. And my best advice, I'm sure you'll have even better advice, but my best advice to that adoptive family is to be there, to let that child be angry, to have a safe space for that child to express whatever she's feeling. She's gonna hate you, she's gonna hate her adoptive parent, or her adoptive parent, she's gonna hate her birth parents, she's gonna hate the world, and she has every right to that anger and that grief. And she needs to know it's okay to feel those things. And she's gonna feel differently and more nuance and more complexity, and she's gonna understand things differently as she moves through developmental stages, as she becomes a parent herself. Things are just going to change for that child. And maybe she needs a objective third party, a counselor who knows something about adoption to talk to.
Well, you were an adoptive kid at 14. Were you angry?
I was angry because I was 14 and I was a girl. I don't know that I was specifically angry about adoption, but I can tell you that as an adopted child, you go through this whole adoption process, and it's hard work. There's no question. It's totally worth it, but it's hard work. The thing that gives me pause, the thing that keeps me up at night is at some point, no matter how much I tell my daughter I love her, no matter how much we surround her with other adopted children, at some point the light bulb is going to come on and she's going to realize there's somebody out there who gave birth to her and chose not to parent her. And she won't articulate it that way, but I know the realization will come. I worry about that, but you know what my parents did, and maybe that's why I wasn't angry about adoption, was my parents hugged me. It sounds like such a trite thing, but words don't always work. Yeah. Sometimes you need to just be there, and you need to.
I think here's the issue that I've learned. This is something from a gabby, talkative kind of a talk my way out of everything, you know, talk. There's a wonderful communication that occurs by listening.
Yes.
And I mean, it's not just kind of look like you're listening and you're going, now let's see, how am I going to respond to that? What's my answer to that? How am I going to talk about that? No, it's really listening.
Yes.
With all your heart. I mean, as a clinician, that's very important. And I think that's a wonderful communication. It's sort of like what you do when you help somebody through a dying process. You go there, doesn't matter what you say.
Yep.
You just need to be there. And listen.
I'll tell you too. My daughter was 2 minutes old when she came to us, and so she was an infant. She is now almost 3. She sometimes wants to pretend she's a baby, and I have decided if she's 14 and she wants to crawl on my lap and have me rock her like she's a baby, if that's what she needs to connect with me, I'm going to do that for her. Not every child is going to want to do that, and she may not want to do that, but I think that's if they're holding hands or sitting next to somebody on the sofa or just sitting on the sofa, even if they're angry at you, I think all of that makes that connection and makes them surrounded with love even when they're angry.
I love your answer, Huggy. While working on this show, we have found that it is not unusual for people who were adopted into a family as children then adopt when they become adults.
Jamie was adopted as an infant, and I was actually adopted into my best friend's family when I was a junior in high school. My parents divorced, and so that to stay in the same school district, I lived with my best friend's family for the last 2 years. And I mean, obviously adoption was a big part of our life, and we just felt that God was calling us. We had 4 children of our own, and we couldn't have any more, and so we wanted to have one more, and we thought that adoption would be a good thing for us.
There wasn't really an agency involved for us. It's an orphanage in Port-au-Prince that 2 American women are actually responsible for in terms of like ownership, and so we talked to them on the phone, and they asked us to, the standard for them is just to at least pray about it for 3 days, which we both did. He was on the road, surprise, surprise, at some game. And so I think on a Monday morning, we called her back and said yes, that there was nothing really that would stop us. We knew that this was the right direction to go. And then we got like a checklist from them of all the steps, that we had to take. And
they had their own attorney at the orphanage, and so we worked with a Haitian attorney. We had to go through, I think it was Lutheran Social Services in Sioux Falls, because they have to do background checks, do a home study. And then once we got everything done, you just kind of have to wait until the Haitian government decides to move on it, which could be right away, or you could wait. And so our process took 10 months.
We are amazingly changed and blessed and better educated, for lack of a better word, as a family because of what we did decide to do and because of Naika being in our home. But setting out to do it, I will speak for myself, I had no reservations. I mean, I'm adopted, and all I had in my head was just to pay it forward. That's all.
After having gone through it, and she's been with us 7.5 years now, I mean, it hasn't always been easy, but it hasn't always been easy having our own children, and there are just different issues than our other children, but it's, there isn't any question it's been worth it.
When I look back now, I mean, we were strangers, right? When we met her in Miami at the hotel, we're strangers. She's in a whole different country that smells different, looks, I mean, I could get teary just thinking about the fear that she must have been feeling at 2.5 years old in a hotel. I mean, she's never seen anything like it. So when I look back at those pictures, now that I know her better, I can see, oh my goodness, it was traumatizing for her.
Because you're bringing her home and everybody's happy about it, and I guarantee you she's not, because she has no idea what's going on. Different language, different color skin. She would, I can remember, she would laugh with our kids, like if they were taking a bath, or but as soon as we walked in the room, boom, she just went quiet.
There was a long time before we heard her start, speaking, but like Scott said, she wouldn't do that with us, she would do that with Natalie, her sister. Well, that's what an orphanage mentality is, like there's always that,
survival.
Yeah, survival mode.
She may never totally forget it, we always talk, I always tell Jamie, there's just certain needs we're not going to be able to meet with her that we can meet with our other children, and we just have to rely on God to meet those, because we're not going to be perfect parents. Probably, it seemed like for our boys, our 3 boys were older. It didn't seem like it took much for them to adjust to her, but Natalie, was the youngest girl. They're 9 months apart, and she went from being the only girl, the princess, to having to share a room and all her stuff. I thought she handled it really well.
Again, that dual component, that for an adopted person, it's not one or the other. One is not more real than the other. Naika has two moms, two dads, two families.
Because I'm sure people adopt for all different kinds of reasons, but the most important reason are the needs of the child, not the needs of the people that are adopting. Because if that's the focus, I think they're going to miss out on the needs of the child, and they're great. I mean, they just are.
Well, welcome back to On Call. Tonight we have Mothers Via Adoption, Dr. Deb Johnston with Avera Medical Group Brookings, and attorney Kristin Asche as our guest attorney. That's kind of neat. This is the first attorney we've had on this.
I'm happy to.
And also I'm an adoptive father. So we've got 3 people who have adopted and one that's been adopted.
We're missing a first mother, you realize.
What's that?
We're missing original parents. A parent who has placed a child. We're missing a birth parent.
Yeah, we are. And I can say that I'm sure that there's great grief and yet rejoicing when it's the right time to let someone else raise that child when you are going to not be able to do it like you should. I think that's what people realize, and that maybe this is the time not to be a mother or a parent. This is the time to be a kid yet. Let someone else who really wants to be the parent do that. There's an issue about abortion that's asked, and that's one of these. Why isn't there more talk about adopting U.S. children, especially with the discussion on abortion?
This is also another one of those hot topics, and people really conflate adoption and abortion, but they are 2 totally separate issues.
Conflate meaning?
Confuse. They make them 2 sides of the same coin, and they're not. Adoption doesn't influence abortion rates. Abortion doesn't influence adoption rates. They are not the same issue, and that's a very hot topic in a lot of adoption conversations and adoption reform. People want to make adoption about abortion and adoption an alternative to abortion, but they're very different conversations. They're very different decisions that people have to make, and it kills me when I see people present, well, you can just adopt that baby. You don't have to raise that baby. You should have that baby and then give it up for adoption. It's a very emotionally wrought and very challenging topic, but it's a very statistically, scientifically wrong concept that by impacting adoption, you're going to impact abortion.
Right. But it is an option that women and mothers, and fathers too, can make. We don't have to abort. There is an option. And we can have that baby, and there will be someone else who will take that parenting role.
If you are not ready to parent, if you honestly feel that you don't want to parent, there are alternatives. You don't have to be the one to parent your child. But I think we also have to realize that in my practice, I take care of a lot of women who are first mothers, and they never forget that baby.
First mothers meaning that they
meaning they're the woman who got pregnant and birthed that child and then made the decision that they weren't at that point in their life able to parent that child and chose to place that child for adoption.
But now, and you say that they don't forget that child, but
they don't forget that child.
And that's fine, that's good, and it's important that they don't.
That's right, exactly. So, you know, I really think that, yes, adoption is an option, and people who are faced with an unwanted pregnancy or a pregnancy in a circumstance where they don't feel that their circumstances change and they're not prepared to parent that child, they should be ready to think about adoption.
That's right.
They should be able to think about all of their options. And you know, we're spending a lot of time talking about international adoption and infant adoption, but there's also a lot of kids in foster care that are very much in need of families too, and I think that they're often kind of the forgotten face of adoption. And
right, the foster kids that are there waiting. Now, any comment that you would have about this discussion that Deb and I just had?
No, honestly, the abortion issue did not play into my decision to adopt. I don't know if it played into Bo's birth mother's decision to place for adoption, but it's not been, I've not tied the two topics together, I guess I'll put it that way.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to talk about in following the Nagy family story. I mean, wasn't that the most gorgeous story that you could?
Story. Oh my gosh.
So as they were talking about the trauma of that child coming into that family going, oh my gosh, where am I? Who are these people? They look so pale. What has happened to me? I'm in big trouble. And the frightened sense that she had, and now the mom says, and now that I know her, and I've looked back at that, you know, how fearful, almost traumatic it was. Any comments about that?
That so resonated with me. I think about that with my two children and how their whole world changed in a heartbeat in China. We traveled to China to get our children, and the way it works in China, your children come to you or you go to your children, there's this handover and it's kind of all done. And they just have no chance to get to know you in their own environment. And in some cases, these are children who've been transported from their orphanage or their foster home, or they've gone through their whole life is just turned upside down and changed.
Suddenly they're put in your arms and they're going,
and it's a horribly traumatizing experience for any child. Imagine any parent who has a child. Imagine your child just suddenly being dropped in the middle of something else. Even if you share the same language, it's horribly traumatizing for those kids.
What do you remember?
I remember.
You were how old when you were?
I was a toddler. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was between 2 and 3. My brother was almost 5. And ironically, my adoptive parents lived just a block from my foster parents. And so there was a fair amount of running back and forth.
Oh, really?
Between the two. And of course, there was these are going to be your new parents. And so go hang out with them whenever you want. And so just by kismet, we had the opportunity to transition more than the average person would. And I think now with foster placements in particular, there's much more attention paid to get to know the adoptive parents and that type of thing.
There's some changes going on. Yeah. Most adoptions involve children who are already born, but with the embryo adoption, the amazing process begins before birth.
For nearly 2 years, Van Maanens tried to get pregnant, but a genetic condition meant they could never conceive a child on their own, and in vitro was also not an option. But conceiving a child that was not genetically theirs was possible. They had already begun to discuss traditional adoption when their doctor mentioned a procedure they had never heard of, adopting an embryo from a family who used in vitro fertilization and had additional frozen embryos remaining. It was a chance for Ashley to carry a child.
That was something I wanted so much. I felt like I would be missing out on something, and I know that adoption is wonderful, and we were certainly ready to go forward with the traditional adoption, but we were just so excited when we found out that we could have both, basically.
After a match with a donor family through an embryo adoption agency in California, 1 out of 3 embryos took, and 9 months later, Josephine was born.
It was 10 days after the embryo transfer, which was really too soon to even take a pregnancy test, but I couldn't resist. And it said pregnant, so.
Embryo adoption conceptually may sound similar to in vitro, but the two are very different.
If we had done in vitro, it would have been retrieving eggs from my body, mixing them with Kurt's sperm, and then putting them back into my body to carry the baby. It would be genetically our child.
But Josephine was created by another woman's egg and another man's sperm. Even though she is not genetically their baby, that doesn't matter to the Van Maanens.
She's the baby we were supposed to have, I'm sure of it.
The Van Maanens have been in contact with their donor family and hope one day to meet in person.
They live quite a ways away from us, but they do have a daughter as well. They have an 8-year-old daughter, so we hope that Josephine will get to someday meet her, hopefully.
Please call in your questions about tonight's topic. Call 1-888-376-6225, or you could email them to questions@oncalltelevision.com. Well, that was a beautiful story.
Baby.
And a beautiful baby, you know, heartwarming to see that child, and then a mom to be able to carry that baby for 9 months and birth that baby. Certainly feels connected. So great story. Any comments that we should make about that? I have not heard a lot about.
I love that they were able to do that. That's a heartwarming story. It really is.
So that we do know. I think Joni knows the adoptive agency, the agency that allowed or facilitated that. And this might be a good time to talk about different agencies. If you're a woman who's pregnant and you would rather let someone else raise that child because of their circumstance, or if you're a parent or parents that would like to look at adopting, we have a list, do we not? Here's a list. Just let's leave that up for a minute and talk about those. Read them out. Kristin, would you know about those?
We used All About You. We had a fantastic experience with them, and I highly recommend them. I'm advocating for All About You.
Yes.
As we said, I think Cultured International has a very good reputation with international adoptions.
They worked with us, and they were fabulous. I mean, the whole thing in China, but they do all sorts of countries.
Yep.
Deb, any comment?
We actually use Lutheran Social Services, which I think is maybe on the next page of the list because I don't see it up there. And they did our home study for us, and they do have an international program as well. But we had used a small China-only agency for our international program, which was based out of Texas. So
you can internet for agencies. Certainly.
Do your homework. You know, talk to other families who have used that company. Definitely do your homework. There are agencies out there that are ethical. There are agencies out there that are not ethical, and you really want to be sure that you're dealing with people who are above board and who take the process seriously.
What would be the unethical ways that could happen? People would take your money, and then you just sit there for years and years, and you give them more money. And
you know, I think, you know, one thing you have to be aware of, as Kristin can really testify to, nobody can guarantee as an adoptive parent that you are going to come out on the other end of this with a child. I think that was one of the appeals for us of the international program was
there's a lot of Chinese girls at that time.
In China, it was a predictable process, and you know, you wouldn't know exactly when, but you kind of all went through it in a cohort. And the domestic program was you'd wait and you'd wait and you'd wait for somebody to pick you to parent their child. And that's the thing about if you're wanting to do domestic infant adoption, you're waiting until a birth parent makes a good match with you. But you really want to be sure that that birth parent is doing this because they really feel that that's the best option for them and their child at that point in time. So you want to be sure that the organization you're dealing with
is a good one. Kristin, any comments about organization?
Do a Better Business Bureau search on the name. Do a Google search. You know, there were agencies I'd heard of. I did a Google search and I found, you know, blog post after blog post where they'd had bad experiences from birth moms and from parents. There's a lot of resources out there to use, but the biggest thing is trust your gut. If you go into an interview with an agency and it just doesn't feel right to you, either because you don't feel supported or you feel like they're going to do things that doesn't jive with your ethics or your morals, then find a different agency. There's tons of them out there. Find one that suits you.
Got to feel right about it.
Right.
Pierre, someone called in, just a comment, one of 25 grandchildren, 7 of whom are adopted, has worked out really well.
Beautiful.
Isn't that?
Yeah. And what I really love about that is that not one of those 25 grandchildren, that's such a normative experience. You know, 6 of my other cousins are also adopted.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that I really love in my family. I've got my 2 adopted kids. They've got an adopted cousin. It's just a normal experience in my family.
Part of the way it is. Here is a comment from Wakanda, suggestion to mother and 14-year-old angry child. Watch the movie October Baby. It may help. Have either one of you seen that? I have not.
No, I have not.
I have not heard. October Baby, you can go on the internet and hunt it down and maybe find it at Netflix or go down to Mr. Movies or wherever it is that you want it. Here's a comment from Mitchell. Another suggestion for angry child. Tell her that her birth mother loved her so much she wanted the best for her, and placing for adoption was the best. I think that's the answer that we always said. You know, we don't know what happened, but Mom made a decision thinking about you.
The hard thing about that, though, is if my mom gave me up because she loved me so much and now you love me, when are you going to leave me? When are you going to decide that you love me so much you're going to leave me? It's a very nuanced, it's a very complicated thing. And that is what we always, you know, say. That's the normal response. Well, your mother loved you so much that she gave you up.
So, and you love me, so am I in trouble?
Am I in trouble?
And there's no good answer.
And there's no good answer. The answer is it's a broken world, and.
But you are never going to be let go by me. You're stuck with me forever.
Right.
Here's a comment from Aberdeen. Are there resources for support groups for parents who have adoptive children and their children as well? Do you know of any support groups anywhere?
Yes. There's one in Brookings. I don't know the contact information. I could get the information. Perhaps you could provide it in a different way.
Joni may actually have it.
Right.
I think Joni has been involved in that. I know that there is an organization for adoptive children in Sioux Falls. I think that your agency is usually a good resource of contact information for you.
All right. Time for our weekly flu update. In South Dakota, influenza is decreasing, but not gone. This season in our state, 30 people have died with influenza, including a baby.
With 2012 behind us, our thoughts turn to romance. That's right. We're entering a time of year symbolized by none other than the flu bug. Did you know flu season usually doesn't peak until February, sometimes even later? Why take chances? It's not too late to get vaccinated, because stopping the flu starts with you.
My grandmother, Axie, died at 99, having lived a blessed yet tragic life. As a young girl, she lost her father to some illness, and her mother, struggling to raise 4 children, lost a second husband, and then a third. When the third husband died, Axie's mother, out of desperation, put some of her children into an orphanage, and Axie grew up separated from her family. Obviously, Axie held no grudge, since during a very successful professional life as a federal judge, Axie cared for her aging and then dying mother, and orphan made good. The history of adoption is as old as humankind, with family members raising children orphaned by death or war or economic destruction. The Middle Ages introduced the concept of orphanage when babies were left at the door of monasteries and were raised in the institution of the church. But much of what the world knows of adoption and rules to protect orphans actually stems from the orphan trains of the United States late 1800s. The American Civil War and an increase in immigration brought orphanage overcrowding and huge numbers of homeless children roaming the streets of East Coast urban cities. A group of religious leaders spearheaded a solution by shipping them on trains to the rural West. Over the next 70 years, something like 250,000 orphaned, abandoned, or homeless children were placed on trains and sent to Western rural foster families working the land. The largest mass relocation of children to ever occur. This helped establish foster care in America and brought many lost youth into families where discipline and love gave them a chance for a reasonable life. At the same time, however, many of these children were indentured and exploited rather than adopted and made to become farm laborers and household servants. Well, because of this social experiment, the need to protect children from abuse developed. And the best example was a Minnesota adoption law of 1917, requiring background checks of families with follow-up after placement. More foster homes were encouraged instead of institutional orphanages after this, and the American trend for adoption to ensure the best interest of the child spread globally. It started in the West, in the middle U.S., and spread globally. Presently in the U.S., not every orphan, though, is adopted, with something like 130,000 children now awaiting adoption. Another little Axie out there needs a parent. Well, I mean, that's a comment about my grandmother. And, you know, I never thought of her as adoptive. I mean, her mother was, my mother was kind of raised by her grandmother, but that was during the time that my grandma, Axie, was working, and Grandma Day was there in the house, kind of looking after Jody as she was growing up. It's a beautiful story to me that Axie was so loving to take care of her mom in the end there. Any comments about the orphan trains? Were you either familiar with that story?
Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard that. I am a child adopted out of foster care, though, so I advocate for it 100%.
So, yeah, and so, I mean, if someone out there in the audience, if you got a story about the orphan trains, I'd love to hear your call. Call in, 1-888-376-6225. Give us an information about orphan trains if you've got it. But what do you know, Deb?
I'm familiar with the orphan trains. That's, you know, for some of those kids it worked out, and for a lot of those kids it actually was a really horrible experience. So I think it was the start of recognizing that it needed to be a child-centered process. There's a lot of horror stories looking at the history of adoption in this country. A lot of stories of children essentially being stolen, a lot of stories of birth mothers with no options, women. There's a great book, The Girls Who Went Away, I think it's called, about the baby steal, the baby scoop era, where
babies are stolen.
Exactly. Well, essentially, a single mom, especially a teenager in previous generations, really had no options. There was a lot of shame associated with that, and the family would ship her off to a home somewhere where she'd birth her baby, and it would just be taken from her, and that would be the end of it. So there's
the baby scoop.
The baby scoop era. There's a lot of things we shouldn't be very proud of in adoption history.
I would say, though, those kids in eastern cities, there was at one time something like 30,000 homeless kids roaming the streets, and they shipped them to save the city, right? Going to get rid of them. We're going to send them out to the Midwest and let the farmers teach them how to work.
Right.
And you know what? I think if they ended up as an indentured servant, or they ended up as a servant, that was an awful thing instead of a family. But it was better than being in a city as a homeless kid, I would think. Even that was better. Abuse is not right, though, ever. Here's a comment. In Brookings, there is an informal group. I believe it's organized by the Nagys.
Good to know.
And also Shelley Bayer. Okay. Here's a question from Sioux Falls. Explain the drop in adoption in the U.S. There's been a significant drop in the numbers of kids that have been adopted. Now, I'm not certain about that. I read something that it's remained steady at 130,000. But there has been now, there's more kids in need. It used to be there was more parents looking for adoptive kids. Now there's more kids in need, and the adoption has not been occurring so easily. What do you know about that? Deb, you're looking at me going, I didn't know.
Well, you know, I think that there's a lot of factors that play into adoption, and who's waiting for homes and who's waiting to have a child placed with them. I think one of the issues is that single parenthood no longer has the stigma that it used to have. So choosing to parent a child is a more viable choice now than it would have been, say, 30 years ago. So there's fewer newborns that are being placed for adoption. Certainly the international adoption program has changed significantly since the time you and I went through it, when there were large numbers of children coming to the U.S. from China. Now there's more adoptions coming out of Africa. Colombia has closed in the meantime. Vietnam opened again and closed again. So there's a lot of changes in that field too.
We're running out of time, so we need to talk quickly about open and closed adoption. Any comment?
I think both of them work. I really do. We have a closed adoption. But
explain that.
Well, closed meaning no contact between the child or the adoptive family and the birth family. Open meaning various levels of contact, from pictures and letters all the way to visits. I actually know of one family where the birth mother babysits for the child who was adopted, and so there's a full range of open adoption. A lot of times it's a discussion between the birth family and the adoptive family. In our case, our birth mother was adamantly opposed to an open adoption. So we have no contact. I send pictures and letters once a year on my daughter's birthday to the agency, not even directly to the birth mother. She has the option whether or not she collects them. But that was her choice. I do think that there are some circumstances where open adoption, where you create that connection, and then that child can ask that birth parent the questions that my child is going to ask me at some point that I don't know the answer to. So I think they both work. But I think it really depends on the families involved.
All right, so we've got 1 minute. Take-home message, and then take-home message.
Celebrate your story and trust your gut. I think regardless of what your story is, you've got to own it and you've got to celebrate it. And you always know the right decision, and even when you don't feel like you do, whether it be agency, child, placement situation, open versus closed, trust your gut.
But what do you mean by celebrate your situation?
I think, in my case, I was adopted. My parents celebrated my adoption, so it became a very viable choice when I wanted to have a family. Yep. Celebrate it, own it, and really, yeah.
Deb?
Don't forget that however happy adoption makes us, adoption starts in loss. There's a quote out there that I really love that I think is so important for everybody to remember. We all want to talk about adoption, rainbows and ponies. It's a beautiful thing, and it is a beautiful thing. But adoption is a redemptive response to a terrible tragedy.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This brings us to the end of our adoption show. I sincerely thank our studio guest, Dr. Deb Johnston with Avera Medical Group Brookings, and attorney Kristin Asche for helping answer all the wonderful questions from our audience. We had a couple left that I didn't get to. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
And next week, South Dakota Public Television is airing special programming dealing with gun violence in America. Nova, PBS Frontline, many other programs will feature this topic. On Call will again be live here in the studio with our special program answering your questions dealing with firearms and the mental health crisis. Get your questions ready. Be sure to join us then. You might be ready to shoot us too. I don't know. It'll be again an interesting time. I'm fearful of this topic. Don't forget to visit the website Be Well South Dakota, and we'll learn more about that. BeWellSouthDakota.com. And from Michael Fox, paraphrasing Vince Lombardi, family is not an important thing, it's everything. Until next time, stay healthy out there, people.
Funding for On Call is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Larson Manufacturing is proud to support On Call, starting its 11th year of opening doors for important medical information. And by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, Regional Health, the Brookings Health System, Dr. Mark Bubach with Dakota Allergy and Asthma, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.